Welcome to State of the Offense. Today we will look into the wide receivers in the NFC South who have top 60 wide receiver draft positions to prepare you for your upcoming fantasy football drafts. The Carolina Panthers have decided to overhaul their passing game this offseason. Terrace Marshall and Ian Thomas, who started last year, will be playing behind many of the new acquisitions. The Panthers decided to bring in two veteran wide receivers in free agency in Adam Thielen and DJ Chark. They also signed veteran tight end Hayden Hurst. The veteran presence Panthers were looking for was to help speed the development of rookie quarterback Bryce Young. The Panthers also drafted Jonathan Mingo in the second round to grow with Young. None of the Panthers are getting drafted at wide receiver top 60 except for Adam Thielen. His best days as a player are behind him at 33, but Thielen was able to be a productive number 2 wide receiver alongside Justin Jefferson in Minnesota. He played 1,042 snaps with an 83 grade for the Vikings. DJ Chark and Terrace Marshall have both been limited in the preseason. Chark with a hamstring issue and Terrace Marshall has been experiencing back problems. Both Chark and Marshall are questionable for week 1. This opens up the possibility of Mingo being the number 2 wide receiver on opening day. Adam Thielen was the wide receiver 39 in total points scored last year, but he was only the wide receiver 52 in average points scored. Thielen averaged 9.9 fantasy points per game in Minnesota. Drafters are kind of hesitating on Thielen this year. He's going between the wide receiver 53 and 56, and his overall ADP is between rounds 11 and 13. With a rookie quarterback and possibly a rookie wide receiver starting alongside Thielen in the opener, Thielen should be pretty busy early in the year. I expect an eventual decline in Adam Thielen's production once Chark and Marshall are healthy and Jonathan Mingo has had more of an opportunity to get acclimated to the league. I rate Adam Thielen as my wide receiver 48 and my player 137 this year. I think a 12th round pick is worth it for him. He will probably have some good games early in PPR formats. If you get a few quality starts from him, then it is a draft pick wisely spent. Drake London's rookie year was pretty decent considering the Falcons' passing game was the second worst in the NFL. London surpassed tight end Kyle Pitts as the number 1 option in the passing game. While he did not flash as spectacularly as his wide receiver draft classmates Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, it was impossible for him to do so because the Jets and Saints situations were better than Atlanta's situation last year. There are 3 big changes that will affect the passing game in Atlanta for 2023. Kyle Pitts is 100% after missing 7 games last year. Desmond Ridder is the new quarterback 1 for the Falcons. And the Falcons drafted Bijan Robinson at running back from Texas. And he should take a lot of defensive attention away from the passing game. London has a chance to improve in year 2 because the offense will have more weapons on the field. The wide receiver 2 should be upgraded as well as the Falcons let go of Olamide Zaccheaus and signed Mac Hollins from Las Vegas. Between London, Pitts, and Hollins, Atlanta has 3 guys who are 6'4" or taller. I think that drafters are treating Drake London well this year and they are not underestimating a potential breakout from him. He is the wide receiver 24 on Yahoo and the wide receiver 32 drafted on ESPN. The experts on those sites have London ranked a bit higher than drafters. Yahoo ranks London as their wide receiver 21 and ESPN ranks London as their wide receiver 26. Yahoo rates this guy as their player number 48 overall. While I think that Drake London is a good player who will improve, I'm not ready to spend a 4th or 5th round pick on him yet. London is my wide receiver 31 and my player 76. As my player 76, I grade him as a 7th rounder. If he's my fantasy wide receiver 3, where I can start him in a flex spot, I'd be happy with him. Tampa Bay has one of the toughest wide receiver situations to evaluate this year because of one major factor, Tom Brady's retirement, and one minor factor, the loss of wide receiver 3, Russell Gage, for the season. The Bucs appear to be willing to start the season with the 6th round rookie as their wide receiver 3 with Trey Palmer. Palmer has looked good in the preseason and he was a highly recruited player from LSU before he transferred to Nebraska. The much bigger story is the change from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield at quarterback. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin will probably take a bit of a hit from playing with Mayfield. I expect Chris Godwin to suffer more than Evans for a few reasons. Tom Brady was immobile last year, and he checked down to Chris Godwin on plenty of short passes last year. Brady only averaged 6.4 yards per attempt in 2022. Baker Mayfield is much more mobile than Brady, and he's a bit more of a risk taker than Brady. I think that Baker will look deep to Evans a lot more than Brady could last year. Evans is still a matchup nightmare for cornerbacks in the NFL. At 6'5", 231 pounds, his game has aged very well. He can still use his body well to win the jump balls downfield. Chris Godwin is as steady a possession receiver as there is in the league. He caught 73.2% of his targets last year, 9.8 yards per catch average. Unless the Bucs can protect Mayfield better than Brady was protected last year, and the Bucs can send Godwin downfield more, I don't think that Godwin's game fits Mayfield's style nearly as well as Evans fits it. Drafters are picking Godwin before Evans in most situations. On Yahoo, Godwin is the wide receiver 27, while Evans is the wide receiver 30. On ESPN, Godwin is the 23rd wide receiver picked, while Mike Evans is the 27th. Yahoo's experts are extremely high on Chris Godwin this year. He is their wide receiver 18, and they rank him as their 63rd player overall. ESPN ranks Godwin as their wide receiver 20, and Evans is their wide receiver 29. I believe that everyone has this backwards. Evans outproduced Godwin even in PPR formats last year. Evans' ability in the red zone and downfield should not be overlooked. Evans still caught 77 passes last year. You can question how these wide receivers fit in with Baker Mayfield, but Mayfield isn't going to be dumping the ball off to Chris Godwin in the flat the way that Tom Brady did last year. Many of Godwin's easy fantasy football points will go away because of this. The Buccaneers were the number 2 passing team in the NFL last year with Tom Brady. The two teams Baker Mayfield played for, Carolina and the Rams, finished 29th and 27th in passing. In 2021, with a full season with the Cleveland Browns, the Browns were 27th in passing. How well can Baker Mayfield support Mike Evans and Chris Godwin? I rank Mike Evans above ADP and Chris Godwin below ADP. In a year where Mayfield was successful in Cleveland in 2020, where he only had Odell Beckham for 7 games, Jarvis Landry was the number 1 receiver, and he was only thrown the ball 101 times in 15 games. Last year in 15 games, Chris Godwin had 142 targets from Tom Brady. Big difference. If Mike Evans is available for the whole year, Godwin's competition for targets is a lot higher than what Jarvis Landry had in 2020 without Odell Beckham. I rank Mike Evans as my wide receiver 23 and my 55th player overall. He still has wide receiver 1 upside in fantasy football. He finished as the wide receiver 15 in points scored, and he was tied for the 12th best average in the league. I also believe that my ranking takes into account a Brady to Mayfield dip for Mike Evans. Chris Godwin is my wide receiver 34 and my player 81 overall. He was in the 18 to 19 range in PPR formats last year. And I asked, do you seriously think that Chris Godwin is going to catch 104 balls and get targeted 142 times in this offense? Personally, I don't. The difficult journey from Michael Thomas back to the field with the Saints has taken an important step this offseason. Most observers did not believe after last year that Michael Thomas and the Saints would be back together. His contract situation, the injuries, and the emergence of both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed last year as rookies looked like the Saints were ready to move on from Michael Thomas. But the exact opposite happened. Thomas actively wanted Derek Carr as his quarterback and helped recruit him to New Orleans, and the organization was willing to give Thomas another chance. As a Saints fan, it is nice to see that the team is willing to stand by one of its great players through troubling times. All indications in the preseason are that Mike is ready to go for the opener. In the 3 games he played last year, he was unbelievably efficient. He caught 72.7% of his targets last year with Jameis Winston as his quarterback, not Drew Brees. He scored 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. Unfortunately for Saints fans, his foot didn't hold up. In fantasy football, Michael Thomas was tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown for the 12th best average in the NFL with 16.3 fantasy points per game. There are a lot of Michael Thomas believers out there. He is getting drafted in the 9th round as the 41st wide receiver taken. The experts are rating him as the wide receiver 44 on ESPN and wide receiver 48 on Yahoo. I believe that Derek Carr and Michael Thomas will work well together and that Mike will be good this year. I just don't trust him to stay healthy. Michael Thomas and Jameson Williams of Detroit are the two biggest risk-reward players this year. Both can have great years and finish high in fantasy points. Williams will miss 6 games because of a suspension, so his upside is limited over a 17-game season. But after week 7, he could really turn into a very valuable fantasy player. Michael Thomas over 17 games is a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football. It's just, can we get 17 games out of Michael Thomas? I'm a little lower on can't guard Mike than his ADP, but not by much. He is my wide receiver 47 and my player 106 overall, so I run a good chance of getting him in the 9th round. I just hope that I have 3 wide receivers I'm comfortable with before I pick them though. Chris Olave's rookie year was sensational. He had a few bumps and bruises where he only played 607 snaps, but if he can be in the 1,000 snap range with Michael Thomas on the other side, Chris Olave will be mega productive. Olave is a complete wide receiver, but last year he showcased his talent as a deep threat. If Rashid Shaheed is completely healthy this year, I can see Olave being thrown the ball on every type of route. Juwan Johnson has been the star of training camp, and then we also have Jimmy Graham back as a red zone specialist, so no team should be able to rotate coverage towards Olave this year. I think that Olave may end up being one of the most efficient wide receivers this year because of Derek Carr and the talent around him. As a rookie, Chris Olave was the wide receiver 22 in average points per game, and he was the wide receiver 23 in total points scored. This was done with only about 60% of the snaps that most starting wide receivers play in a year. In fantasy drafts, there are a lot of Chris Olave fans out there. He is generally the 13th or 14th wide receiver taken. I rate Olave as my wide receiver 13 as well. He is getting drafted in the middle of the 3rd round. I also rate Olave as a 3rd rounder, and I hope that he falls to me with my 3rd round pick as many times as possible. I think that his upside is as good as top 5 wide receiver if everything goes right for him in 2023. If you like today's coverage of the NFC South wide receivers, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.